Hello and welcome to the Comp Pod. I'm Andy.
And I'm Ivy. Thanks for joining us.
I want to start today with a number that, honestly, it really stopped me in my tracks. 77%.
It is a number that is hard to wrap your head around, yeah.
That is the predicted increase in new global cancer cases by the year 2050. I mean, we are talking about jumping from roughly 20 million cases in 2022 to over 35 million. That's a fundamental shift.
It is. And usually when we see numbers like that, the conversation, it immediately turns to personal stuff, right? About diet, we talk about exercise, maybe genetics.
Sure.
But there is a massive piece of this puzzle that sits right where we spend most of our waking lives, the workplace.
And that is exactly where we are digging in today. We've got some research here, and it's all centered around a report called The Cost of Exposure, How Occupational Cancer Impacts Workers' Compensation.
That's the one. It was published by Healthy Systems in their winter 2025-26 issue.
So the mission for this deep dive is really to look at where those two worlds collide. We're looking at how workplace exposure drives these diagnosis numbers, yeah, but also
how the whole financial and legal machine of workers' compensation is trying and frankly struggling to keep up.
It feels like we are looking at a collision of three different, just massive forces here. You have the biology of the disease, the shifting legal landscape, and then you've got the economics of modern medicine.
That is the perfect framework for this. It really is a perfect storm of factors. And to understand the magnitude, you have to look at the scope first. Because I think when people hear occupational cancer, they have this very old-timey image in their heads.
Right, you picture the coal miner with the blackened face or maybe a chimney sweep from some Victorian novel.
Exactly. But the data, it paints a much more modern and, a much more pervasive picture. The report highlights that anywhere from 2 to 8% of all cancers are caused by exposures to workplace carcinogens.
Which, purely as a percentage, that might sound small to some people. Oh, only 8%.
Until you do the math on the human cost. One estimate in here suggests that 1 in 5 workers could be at an elevated risk.
1 in 5.
And here's the statistic that I think is the most haunting. 40% of worldwide cancer deaths could theoretically be prevented just by reducing workplace toxins.
Wow. That's a staggeringly high number, 40%. That moves this from, unavoidable tragedy to
a manageable risk, precisely. And we have to look at what kind of cancer we are discussing. The primary culprit is lung cancer.
Makes sense.
Depending on the study you look at, it's something like 54 to 75% of these occupational cancers are lung-related.
Physically, that tracks. I mean, inhalation is the main way you interact with a dirty environment. But this report also zoomed out to a global level. This isn't just a U.S. problem.
No, not at all. And the global data is actually a great leading indicator for what we are seeing everywhere. There was a study of medical claims from 43 different countries. And if you just look at the window between 2019 and 2023, the number of cancer claims grew by 184%.
Okay, so in 4 years, claims almost tripled.
But the cost grew by 242%.
So the problem is getting bigger. And the price tag is growing even faster than the problem itself.
That is the tension that the entire workers' compensation system is navigating right now.
I want to drill down into who is actually at risk here. Because like we said, we have these stereotypes of the industrial worker. And yeah, obviously mining and construction are on the list. But looking through this report, there were jobs that I did not expect to see.
It's the unexpected ones that really make you realize how ubiquitous these exposures are. Let's take the service industry, specifically bartenders and servers.
See, that's one I wouldn't have flagged. Why them?
Well, historically, it is linked to secondhand smoke. We have to remember that even though many places have bans now, cancer has a really long latency period.
Right.
We are seeing the results of exposures from 10, 15, even 20 years ago. But beyond smoke, you've got other environmental factors in those spaces, cleaning, chemicals, particulates that play a role.
That's a great point about latency. We're always looking at a snapshot of the past. What about healthcare workers? That one just feels particularly cruel.
It's the ultimate irony, isn't it? The people treating the sick are getting sick. Healthcare workers show elevated risks for leukemia and liver cancer.
Is that from radiation exposure?
Radiation is part of it, absolutely. But also think about the sterilization chemicals. Think about the hazardous drugs they handle, especially chemotherapy drugs, which are themselves toxic if not handled perfectly. It's a high exposure environment.
Then you have the manufacturing side. The report listed rubber and plastics manufacturing.
That's a big one. You're seeing bladder cancer, leukemia, liver cancer, Multiple myeloma. I mean, when you heat and mold synthetic materials, you are releasing fumes and particulates that are incredibly harmful over a long period.
What about the outdoor jobs? I saw fisheries and landscaping mentioned.
Skin cancer. We often forget that UV radiation is a carcinogen. It's actually one of the most common occupational carcinogens. If your office is the deck of a boat or a golf course, you are just soaking that up every single day.
Now we have to talk about the group that seems to be the center of gravity for almost all legislation in this area. Firefighters.
The list for firefighters it's exhaustive. Lung cancer, mesothelioma, multiple myeloma, sinonasal cancers, cancers of the nose and sinuses. Just think about it. Firefighters are essentially walking into a toxic soup, and it's so much worse now than it was 50 years ago.
Because of what's burning.
Exactly. A house fire in 1950 was mostly wood, cotton, paper. Today, it's plastics, foams, flame retardants, electronics. When that stuff burns, it creates a complex chemical cocktail that is incredibly carcinogenic.
That connects to a trend I saw in the report about the agents themselves. It seems like the list of things we know are bad for us is just exploding.
It is. In 2004, we had identified 28 agents as occupational carcinogens. By 2017, that number hit 47. As of 2021, the total list of substances known to cause cancer in humans reached 256.
So I have to ask, is the workplace actually getting 10 times more dangerous? Or are we just getting better at, catching the bad guys?
It's a bit of both. Our detection is better, science is advancing, so we are identifying risks we just missed before, but we are also introducing new chemistry into our industrial processes constantly. We're inventing new molecules faster than we can study their long-term effects on the human body.
Which brings us to the why. Why are the rates rising so fast? I mean, a 184% increase in claims globally is not a statistical blip. That's a trend.
It's a dominant trend. And to understand it, you have to look at two forces that seem contradictory but are actually compounding each other. First, you have the demographics. Cancer is fundamentally a disease of aging.
The longer you live, the more times your cells divide, the more chances there are for a mistake to happen.
Simply put, yes. In 1960, life expectancy was 52 years. Today, it's over 72. That extra 20 years provides a lot of runway for mutations to escape the body's natural defenses.
So in older workforce people working into their late 60s and 70s, that naturally results in more cancer claims.
Right. But, and this is where the report takes a really interesting turn, it isn't just the older workers. It cites a groundbreaking study by the American Cancer Society showing rising rates in Gen X and millennials.
And that's what's so alarming. We are seeing these rates go up in younger generations for 17 of 34 cancer types. We're talking breast cancer, pancreatic cancer.
It's what keeps public health officials up at night.
So if it's not just aging, what's driving it in younger people?
It's multifaceted. Obesity is a major driver. It's linked to 10 of those cancer types. Then you have environmental chemicals and, significantly, lifestyle habits that were formed in adolescence.
The whole sitting is the new smoking idea.
In some ways, yeah. Sedentary behavior is a huge risk factor. But then you add technology to the mix. We love innovation, but innovation brings new hazards. The report specifically calls out additive manufacturing.
You mean 3D printing?
And 4D printing, it's incredible technology, but it uses new raw materials and it generates waste products, these ultra-fine particles that we're only just starting to understand. The fumes from melting certain 3D printing filaments can be carcinogenic.
So we're introducing these printers into workshops, schools, factories, potentially before we know the full safety profile.
That's the concern. So to recap, you have an aging workforce staying on the job longer. You have a younger workforce that is statistically less healthy. And both groups are working with new, potentially dangerous tech.
That explains the biology. Now we need to talk about the law, because historically, proving your job gave you cancer was, well, it was almost impossible, wasn't it?
It was an incredible burden. Imagine you're a factory worker. You get lung cancer. You have to prove legally that it was the fumes in the factory and not the cigarettes you smoked or the city pollution or your genetics.
It seems like the employer would always have the benefit of the doubt.
They did. But that is changing rapidly with something called presumption laws.
This is a term that kept popping up in the report. For the listener who isn't a legal scholar, what exactly is a presumption law?
It's a legal framework that completely flips the burden of proof. Normally, in workers' comp, you, the worker, have to prove the injury happened at work. With a presumption law, the system presumes the job caused the cancer.
So if I'm a firefighter and I get lung cancer, I don't have to hire a toxicologist to prove the smoke did it.
Correct. The law assumes the smoke did it, and you're eligible for benefits automatically, unless the employer can somehow definitively prove otherwise, which, as we discussed, is very, very hard to do.
And I'm guessing this started with firefighters.
It did way back in the early 1980s. Today, all 50 states have some form of firefighter presumption law. But the important takeaway from this report is that it is not stopping there anymore.
The floodgates are opening up.
They are. We're seeing expansions to lifeguards, peace officers, other first responders, and the legislative activity is just intense. Just in early 2025, we saw bills introduced to expand these presumptions in Connecticut, Florida, Hawaii, Mississippi.
Nebraska and West Virginia. That's a really diverse list of states. This isn't a partisan issue.
No, it's universal. And for the workers' comp system, this volume of automatic claims is a game changer. It just removes the barrier to entry for filing a claim.
Which explains that spiking claim volume we talked about earlier. But volume leads us to the third part of our storm, value, or rather cost, because these are not cheap claims to settle.
They are among the most expensive claims in the entire insurance ecosystem. 80% of U.S. employers now rate cancer as their top healthcare cost driver. In the workers' comp world, a single claim can now exceed $3 million.
$3 million for one person.
And here is the great paradox of modern medicine, which I think is fascinating. We are surviving longer. Cancer deaths have dropped 33% in the last 30 years. That's a miracle of science.
But miracles aren't free.
Far from it. Drugs keeping people alive are exponentially more expensive than what we had 20 years ago. A novel anti-cancer drug routinely costs more than $100,000 a year.
Per year of treatment. And since people are living longer, they're on these drugs for years, not months.
Exactly. Cancer is becoming a chronic condition rather than a fatal one, and we are approving these drugs at a rapid clip. In 2024, the FDA approved 50 novel drugs. 8 of those were for cancer. As of this report, in early 2025, they'd already approved 6 more.
And the report projects these costs to increase 11 to 21% every single year. That just feels unsustainable.
That's the big question. And it isn't just one pill. The report lists drugs like Tibsivo for leukemia or Xtandi and Zytiga for prostate cancer. These are complex medications. And often, you aren't just taking the cancer drug, you're taking what they call adjuvant therapies.
Break that down for us. What's an adjuvant therapy?
Think of them as helper drugs. If the chemotherapy causes severe nausea or other issues, you might need high-end drugs like Sandostatin just to manage those side effects. So you have a whole cocktail of high-cost drugs.
So if you are an insurance payer or an employer, how do you even begin to manage this?
It is really difficult, but the report outlines a shift in strategy. It requires a move away from just paying the bill to actually managing the care. They highlight 3 main pillars: network management, clinical oversight, and patient engagement.
Let's walk through those. Network management, is that just telling patients which pharmacy to use?
Basically, yes, but it's strategic. It's steering patients to specialty pharmacy networks that can provide the drugs more cost-effectively, but still offer high-quality service. It's about bulk buying power and specialized logistics.
And then you have clinical oversight.
This is crucial. This is having pharmacists working directly with doctors to make sure the treatments align with current guidelines. This might be the most important one for long-term outcomes. This is helping patients stick to their meds and manage those side effects so they don't wind up back in the emergency room.
Because an ER visit is the most expensive way to get care.
Exactly. Preventing hospitalization is the absolute best way to control costs. If a patient stops taking their anti-nausea meds, gets dehydrated, and ends up in the ICU, the costs just skyrocket.
So let's zoom out and try to synthesize all of this. We've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We have the biological reality. We're living longer, so our cells have more time to mutate. We have the environmental reality. We're introducing new technologies and chemicals, and younger generations have different health risks.
Right.
Then there's the legal reality. We are passing laws that make it so much easier to claim these sicknesses as work-related, flipping that burden of proof.
And finally, the economic reality. We have developed these miraculous drugs to treat cancer, but they cost a fortune, turning what was a short-term crisis into a long-term, high-cost liability.
The result is this massive strain on the workers' compensation system. I mean, it was designed for broken legs and back strains, and now it's funding multi-million-dollar, multi-year oncology treatments.
It really forces us to rethink the whole social contract of work.
It does. And I guess if I can leave you with one thought to chew on, it's this. Right now, we are seeing these presumption laws expand from firefighters to police to lifeguards. But think about the trajectory. As medical science advances and we get better at linking specific environmental toxins to specific genetic mutations, where does the line stop?
That's the question, isn't it?
If we reach a point where cancer is a manageable chronic condition, but the cost of that management is astronomical, will the definition of occupational hazard eventually encompass just participating in the modern economy?
It's a valid fear. If sitting at a desk for 30 years or working with 3D printers becomes a presumptive cause for cancer, is the current insurance model even sustainable? Or are we looking at a future where the cost of doing business is simply the health of the worker?
That is a heavy thought to end on, but a necessary one. We'll be watching those 2025 bills closely to see where this trend goes next. Thank you for listening to this deep dive into the cost of exposure. Stay curious, stay safe, and we'll catch you on the next one.